JewishHistory.org presents Rabbi Beryl Wine's 5,000 Years of Jewish History. One video clip at a time. Now for a special clip, the story of Passover.
Great holiday of Passover is one of the central days in the Jewish calendar. Historically speaking, the Jewish people were enslaved in Egypt for centuries. Now, the Jewish people came down to Egypt through Joseph. And Joseph, who came down as a slave, sold there by his brothers, eventually rises to become the viceroy of Egypt. And he saves Egypt and the entire Middle East in a tremendous famine so that everybody now can survive. He stored up all the food, and he made Egypt the imperial empire of the time. Joseph dies. The whole generation dies. There arises a new king, in the words of the Bible, who did not know Joseph. The rabbis of the Talmud say it wasn't necessarily a new king. It was a king that purposely forgot Joseph. The Jewish people are very numerous in Egypt. Egypt becomes nervous. Maybe the Jewish people won't be loyal to them, even though as a matter of citizenship, the Jews were more loyal and did more voluntary work than did the Egyptians. Finally, the king enslaves the Jews. And in their enslavement, which lasts centuries, the Jewish people are destroyed almost completely, physically and spiritually. They sink into paganism. Their sons are taken and thrown in the Nile River to be eaten by crocodiles. Their women are taken away from them. And yet, somehow, there is a core of the Jewish people that survives. It remains loyal to the ideas, especially the tribe of Levi, that remains loyal to the ideals of Jacob and Isaac and Abraham. It remains monotheistic in the middle of a pagan society. The great Redeemer, Moses, arrives, himself raised in the Egyptian court, adopted by the princess of Egypt. And he now, under the bidding of the Lord, demands that the Jewish people be freed. There ensues months of negotiations, of plagues, of warnings, of broken promises, until finally, on the night of Passover, the firstborn of the Egyptians are smitten by the angel of death. Pharaoh finally capitulates. Take them out, he says. Go. Not all of the Jewish people went. According to the opinion expressed in the Midrash, as many as 80% of the Jewish people stayed and died in Egypt. But however we will understand those numbers, there is an exodus of millions of people. And not only Jews, but other slaves, other ethnic groups that also were enslaved at the moment of freedom went out with the Jews. And they were called the Erev Rav, the mixture of many nations. Eventually, some of them became Jewish, and some of them did not. And the Jewish people are freed from this great, terrible bondage that they suffered. When did this happen? Well, according to Talmudic sources, we would estimate that it happened in about 1312 before the Common Era. And the Jewish people wander in the desert. The story of Passover is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the story. And here is the great basic Jewish idea, that to be free means that you have to have a purpose. Freedom is not licentiousness. Freedom does not mean that you stand on a street corner all day long and not do anything positive. Freedom has to have a purpose. And the purpose of the Jewish people was to spread the idea of God, of monotheism, of morality, of goodness, of charity throughout the world, in a world that was pretty hostile to those ideas then and seems to be pretty hostile to them even now. In the desert of Sinai, the Jewish people are created as a people. They receive the Torah from Sinai, and they embark on their long journey of education, inspiration, and of attempting to being a light unto the nations of the world. Now, in the desert, the story of the Passover is reenacted, and it's been reenacted for all of these years. I'm not good at math, but I think it's at least 3,321 years, something like that. 3,321 Passovers. The story is retold because the story tells us the value of freedom, the value of purpose, the value of faith, and the value of family. I've often been asked, well, how do we know that it happened? My answer always has been, at our Passover Seder table, when my father, of blessed memory, was alive, and my father lived to be 103 years old, he saw 5 generations in his family. My father also saw his grandfather, so that at our table, there was a span of over 300 years sitting at the table. My father's grandfather and my father's great-great-grandchild, who, God willing, will live well into the 21st century. So we had 300 years at the table. Well, you only have to imagine another 10 tables like that and you're back to Egypt. It's not hard to imagine 10 tables, though it is hard to imagine 3,321 years. And that's why Passover is the family holiday. That's why we all gather together, our children, our grandchildren, our parents, our grandparents, to sit together. By sitting together, we testify to our past and to our commitment to the future, to our faith, to the fact that we are an eternal people, and to the fact that freedom always means discipline, service, purpose. That's the exalted idea of freedom. The rabbi said there is no free person except he or she that accepts upon themselves the yoke of morality, of Torah, of goodness, of care for others as well. And it's interesting that the first law regarding Passover mentioned in the Jewish law books is the fact that charity has to be contributed for the poor so that they also can have a Passover and that they can also have a wonderful meal and that they would also have the wherewithal to be able to celebrate their freedom as well. So my friends, I want to wish you all a happy and good and kosher Passover, and I hope that this idea of freedom, which the Jewish people represented in the story of Passover, spreads throughout humanity, throughout mankind, and that we'll all be privileged to be free and to be purposeful and to be faithful to ourselves and to our traditions. My name is Beryl Wine. Thank you for watching.
For more on Jewish history, go to jewishhistory.org.